Hi, everyone. We're about to have a very exciting fireside chat. David Drummond of Google is going to be interviewing Jennifer Pahlka of Code for America, an organization that has now sponsored 26 fellows to work on all kinds of aspects relating to improving civic life and particularly improving the way the public sector uses technology. So here we go.
Great. Well, thanks, Ryan, and thanks everybody for sticking through to the afternoon. I know we're getting to the afternoon caffeine time, but hopefully we can say some interesting things to keep you all engaged. So, Jennifer, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for all the work you're doing, which is really straight down the alley of what we're talking about here in digital citizenship and literacy. So I think for those, I'm sure there are folks here who don't really know too much about what Code for America is doing and what you're up to. So why don't you give just a couple minutes to talk about what you guys do?
Sure. So obviously our name derives from Teach for America, and I'm really sad I missed Wendy Kopp this morning. I'm eager to find out if she is honored by our homage to her organization or horrified by it. But it was inspired by Teach for America. We call ourselves now more of a Peace Corps for geeks because Teach for America obviously recruits straight out of college. The average age of our fellows is 28, so we tend to be getting people with a couple years experience in the workforce. But the basic idea is that we've got this amazing talent, at Google, at Facebook, at startups in city and all over the country, and they haven't really been called to service. The beautiful, amazing, convenient, magical consumer internet that we all take advantage of every day has been built by this talent, and the public sector has largely been left behind. And so we're calling that community service. We ask them to take a year off. We do an open call for fellows. So last year we had 550 people apply for our 26 slots. And we do an open call to city governments. What they're doing is they're working with these city governments. So we had a number of, about 22 apply. We chose 8 cities. And we're just in the beginning of our second year. We're working with these 8 cities, and we take those 26 fellows. We put them in small teams of 3 or 4. And the idea about that team is that it mimics a startup. Right. So you've got a couple engineers, a designer, some with product skills. And they partner with the city for the whole year. They identify a particular problem area in their city. They go there, they interview 100 people, literally 100 people inside the city, in community groups, citizens, outside, any stakeholder in the problem. And they come back and they do basically a minimum viable product to sort of guess at what would work, and they build that throughout the year and then test it and iterate. And they do a lot of little random stuff that no one thought they would do, some of which turns into big things. But they're acting like a startup inside a bureaucracy, and really interesting things come out of that.
So what are some examples of some of the projects that have come out of that?
The sort of canonical project shows that it's pretty easy to do amazing technology these days outside of government. But and many of you know this, there's a lot of reasons why it's slower in the public sector. So one of our cities last year was the city of Boston, and they asked us to help with their public schools. And we were working on a number of projects. About halfway through the year, there was a scathing article in the Boston Globe about how parents couldn't figure out which public schools they should be assigned to. And the way they were supposed to do it is they were supposed to read this 28-page printed brochure. And you could read that entire brochure, and you still would not know where your kid was supposed to go because it's a map-based problem. And so they asked our fellows to work on that. In about 2.5 months, a couple of them had put up something called discoverbps.org, where you type in your address, the age of your kid, whether the kid has any siblings in school, and you're returned a map with the schools you're eligible for, and you can read more about them and favorite them, compare them, sort of the things a normal web app would do. So we were told that if that had gone through procurement, through regular channels, it would have taken about 2 years. It would have cost about $2 million. Wow. And the lessons from that are, of course, the cost, which is unconscionable, I think, in the bigger sense, when we're having such budget crises. But there are reasons it takes that long. But it's also, I think, important that people see that the timeliness and the responsiveness is so important, because we can't really trust our government if we feel like it takes 2 years to respond to an issue like that. And I think the third thing is that the way this app looks and how it feels and the way it works is illustrative of a notion that we really can have interfaces to government that are simple, beautiful, and easy to use. And citizens don't believe that right now. They think they're looking at confusing forms all the time. But this shows that it really can be, and I think that it promotes trust between citizens and government.
Great, great. So, okay, so your program is you take these technical folks who are used to being able to build things, to be able to move quickly and do what needs to be done, and they're engineers and so forth, and you plop them into government. And I actually have a lot of experience with this. At my 10 years at Google, one of the things I've had to do over the years is, we need to explain something to some government agency, and so I go along and I have engineer in tow, and and the engineer inevitably walks out of the meeting saying, "Huh?
Yeah,
really?" And can't quite figure it out. So it must be an amazing learning experience, right, for the fellows, right, to go into this context and actually figure out what government does. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how what epiphanies come out of that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people look at what we're doing and we think, okay, it's smarty pants people from Silicon Valley, parachuting into government. The biggest reason we do it isn't just to change government, but to change the engineers, right? To get a community, a generation of people who have great technical and design skills to care about government, to understand why it works the way it does, believe that there's value there, and figure out how to, ultimately how to make it work better for everybody. When they come in, they generally have fantastic skills. There's a lot of technical learning that happens throughout the year. We have a very collaborative workspace. We do skill shares all the time. So they will learn, for instance, through the course of the year, different programming languages, different things from each other. But the main thing they'll learn is how to work in this bureaucracy. So the first thing they do, they come in, we have a 4-week training course. The training course is really, this is what you're going to face when you get into government. The most important thing that they do is a negotiation course. We have them take the Harvard Negotiation Project. And I'd never taken it before, and I'd always thought the term win-win was sort of corny. I took it this year with the fellows, and it actually makes sense. This idea of win-win, there's real concrete value there, and they come out of that going, yeah, it's not about me coming in and changing people's minds. It's about me partnering with a system and coming to a common view. And, they still, even with a whole month of training around that stuff, they still hit a massive wall when they go out there.
Right.
They don't realize how few resources government has. We're just talking about one of the cities that they're in this year, where the city has a real-time transit system, for instance. They can tell you where the buses are at any given time, but there is not a single person in that city government who knows how to use the system other than watching it. So in terms of building other apps on that system, they have no awareness of the data and the value of the data, the fact that data could be extracted out of the system and made more valuable by letting other people build on it. And it's not because they're bad people in any way. It's because that's the resources the government has. It's a small government. It doesn't have a lot of money. It does not attract really a technical group of people. It's not their fault. But how do you start a conversation when there's such a gap from a very technical person who is used to data being available, used to building on modern platforms, with someone who doesn't even know the capabilities of the system that they've bought?
Right.
I'll tell you one quick story about how that worked in Boston last year. They were trying to get a whole bunch of data sets available in Boston for this platform for student data. And one of the things that they needed was again, back to real-time transit, but it was the real-time data about the locations of the school buses. And there's reasons why that should be considered sensitive. And so while they had the support of the mayor and a bunch of other people in government, they were not able to get that data until one day they were in the call center at the Boston Public Schools on one of those days where it snowed massively. It was snowpocalypse on the East Coast last year. We sent these poor California programmers with their little hoodie jackets to Boston
Nice.
during snowpocalypse. It was really a challenge. By the way, we also sent them there forgetting to tell them that they all had to have ties. So
oh my.
they were sharing ties amongst each other. We learned our lesson on that one. They know which cities you have to wear a tie in City Hall and which ones you don't. So they're there in the call center, and they're watching the phones are lighting up. There's a call backlog they can't possibly deal with because all the parents are calling in and saying, "Where's my kid?" The school buses are all stuck in the snow. And of course, what they're doing is they're reading the information off of these big screens and telling them, "Yeah, your kid is on this bus. They'll probably be home in about 20 minutes." And the fellows went over to the person leading the call center there and said, "We could write you an app that your parents could just look at. They could just, find out that information on their own." And they said, "Okay, what would that take?" And they said, "Well, can you give us the access to the data?" And they said, "Sure, here it is."
Wow.
They wrote them the app in a day, and then they had the data that they needed for something else. But I think you really have to come at it from the perspective of these are real people with real jobs, very difficult jobs, and you have to make it worthwhile to them.
Right. Makes a lot of sense. So rolling forward, I know that the program's young, and so you may not have many early returns on this, but everyone that I've met and come to know who was in the Peace Corps, people I've met who did Teach for America, tend to be transformed by the experience and wind up maybe doing something in life after that they might not otherwise have done. Right. What do you think is going to happen with fellows when they leave and when they finish the program? Are they going back to the software companies or the tech companies and kind of doing the same things, or doing those things differently, maybe branching out into other things, starting new ventures, heaven forbid, working for government?
Yeah.
What goals do you have for that, and how do you think that will play out?
We'd love to see them working for government.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be the number one outcome. And we had a class of 19 fellows last year, and I think there's 2 fellows that probably will end up working in government, and they're going to do great stuff. But neither of them actually has that job yet. Mm-hmm. Government moves a little slowly. In Boston, for instance, they created 2 positions that, they're not titled this officially because you don't have titles like civic hacker in city government, but that's what the job is. That's how they've created it, is someone to experiment with technology that connects citizens and government. And so I think eventually those positions will be filled by fellows. But even if our fellows don't fill them, they've created those new positions that would never have existed before because they saw great outcomes from working with our team. Most of our fellows said at the end of last year, I would like to return to the public sector, but this was exhausting and I need a year off. And I think some of next year's fellows certainly will. But part of what I do informally now is take calls from CIOs of city governments and CTOs who say, we decided to hire a chief data officer. Again, title you never would have seen before. Can you help me find somebody? And we have a network of people, again, who care about technology and care about government, and it's small but growing.
Great. Well, let me pivot a little bit and talk more broadly about the concept of civic engagement. And for folks, a lot of us who don't have technical skills, but who are around technology and feel like, the technology is part of our everyday lives. We use the tools that we can and so forth. What do you think, how can, people like me who don't know how to code?
Oh, I don't know how to code either. Just
good,
to be clear.
Good. All right, well, that's good.
HTML maybe a little.
Right. So when we think about, how we're going to use, technology to get more engaged, what are some of the things that we can do you think?
Right. I think I started this thing because I felt like there was this tech talent that was missing from a certain sector. And that was sort of the original thesis. And it's really evolved. I think now, for me, it's much more about a notion of citizenship. Yeah. And you don't need technology to be a citizen. But I think so many of us engage through our technology primarily that when you have a phone in your pocket full of apps that are telling you to be a consumer, that make consumerism really, really easy, then apps that help you be a citizen are important because that's one of the ways you're interacting with the world. One app that we built last year that was sort of was a bit of a revelation for me. Total throwaway project. They do all these little side projects, and some of them turn into something. But again, this snow thing in Boston, one of the fellows in Boston noticed that the fire hydrants get covered in snow. It's not a major problem facing a city, but it is a problem because if they're not dug out and the city doesn't dig them out, they don't work. And he wrote a little app that allows citizens to adopt a fire hydrant, and if you adopt it, you're just agreeing to dig it out when it's covered. It has some game mechanics. You get to name it. So the first one was named Al. And if you don't do your job, someone can steal it from you. So and it will add some more game mechanics on it as it goes. So it's a cute little app, but it's sort of, you thought of it as sort of a throwaway thing. But what happened is that other cities saw it, and all our apps are open source. So this guy, awesome guy in the IT department in Honolulu, saw that app and said he wanted to use it for Honolulu, which I thought was crazy. And then he explained that they have tsunami sirens on the beach, and people steal the batteries out of these. It's very important that the tsunami sirens work for obvious reasons. So he stood it up as Adopt a Tsunami Siren in the state of Hawaii. And now it's spreading to other cities where there are just these places where, and I'm sure many of you in the audience understand this more than others, there simply isn't the money to do that. There isn't the money to go check those tsunami siren batteries every week. But people live right by them. It's easy to dig out a fire hydrant. It's easy, if you're digging out your sidewalk anyway, it's easy to check on a tsunami siren. In Seattle, they're using it to get citizens to clear out clogged storm drains. All you have to do is reach down and move those leaves to the side.
Right.
So it's, in some senses, that app isn't a very government-centric app because you're not calling on government services. But what we realized is, Tim O'Reilly has this line, government is what we do together, right? In that sense, government is right at the center of that app because it's getting people to do things together. And government's playing a role. It's providing the application, but it's getting citizens to help each other.
Right, right. So what could we do? Do you think it will ever become a political issue such that citizens can demand that governments provide more of these apps, more of these opportunities for folks to use the technology to engage? What do you think? Do you think there's any prospect for that being actually discussed in a political debate, and someone might believe that as opposed to some of these wedge issues, it might be something that they need to actually talk to people about in order to get elected? Or how far from that do you think we are?
So I have this thing whenever anyone says politics, I just sort of run away.
Sorry.
And no, it's okay. Just because, I think the answer is I think it is a bridging issue. I think it's a bridging point, especially, and I don't want to go too deep into it, but there's obviously these notions of sort of big government versus small government, and this idea of government creating ways that people help each other is government as a platform. Again, borrowing from Tim O'Reilly. Government as a platform isn't big or small. It's however big it needs to be, and it scales. It scales in a way that government services can't scale. And I think that is huge opportunity to unite people who care about the services and care about reducing the size of government. The reason I kind of always cringe a little about the discussion of politics is that one of the things that we've developed as sort of a value since starting this project is that people put too much attention on that political layer, in my view. We think we're going to change government by electing new leaders, and the real work of government gets done at the bureaucratic level. And especially in the technology world, that word bureaucracy is such a toxic word. We love bureaucrats. We think bureaucrats are what gets stuff done, and if you see a bureaucracy creating something like Adopt a Hydrant or creating an app like Citizens Connect in Boston that lets people help each other, that's to me an amazing function. I mean, there's certainly a lot to complain about bureaucracy, but we really feel like we need to make bureaucracy more popular, sexy, or something if we're going to change the system, because you can't change it just by electing new leaders. You've got to actually play in the operations, the machinery of government.
And part of your point is that can happen without any change and without doing anything in electoral politics. Right? The bureaucracies are there, people are there. If you engage with them, you can get some of this done without having to worry about electoral politics. That's got to be part of your point.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I hope politicians do talk about it in some sense, but I also don't want this notion to be co-opted by any particular political party or political agenda. I think this is for everyone. This is for government working for everybody.
Right. One of the, I saw your tech talk and your TED talk, and you closed it with a great line about, it's one thing to talk about us being a crowd of voices. When are we going to be a crowd of hands?
Yeah.
Do something. Can you talk about what you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm really inspired by the fellows. This is an amazing group of people. They take a year off. They're working for a very small stipend, and I can't believe they live in San Francisco on this stipend. They move across the country, and they're coming with a really unique set of values and skills that I never really anticipated when I created the program. And one thing I noticed about them is that they're certainly chatty in a way. They haven't been particularly political. They've really been doers and makers. I think that the maker movement is sort of the secret sister to the open government movement. One thing I realized that these guys have grown. They're younger than me. They're almost a generation younger than me, and they've grown up with social media, participatory media, their whole lives. So they haven't felt a big need to sort of get on. They're upset about a lot of things in society, but their reaction isn't to sort of get up on a soapbox and complain about it. They, at a pretty young age, are just saying, "Let me get to work. Let me get to work fixing this." And I don't mind doing this thing for no money for a year in order to fix it. And I think that that's indicative of maybe not an entire generation, but certainly a section of this sort of millennials, slightly older millennial generation, is that they kind of take their voices for granted. They have so many channels, and that they know that it's not going to get fixed by more talking. It's going to get fixed by people offering their hands, and then they've translated that value into the apps that they build. That the apps let people not just give feedback to government. This should be better, that should be better. Tons of that. And it's not that we don't need better mechanisms for giving feedback to government. We do, but if it's only voices, and if it's not also an opportunity for citizens to pitch in some real, concrete way, I just don't think we're going to move forward the way that we need to.
Yeah, and so for the average person, when we talk about digital, sort of digital citizenship, what are some of the things that you think people ought to do, and how, what are the responsibilities of a citizen in the digital age with all of these, the tools available to you? Do you think it's any different, or there's some people who think that most of us have used sort of these. Technology and social media, or maybe not social media as much, but a lot of the web-based tools to sort of withdraw from other folks and to the extent you're connected with other folks, it's the other folks. We were talking earlier about the tribe, your tribe online, and how that the internet can be used to divide us into different groups, and we think we're being social, but it's only with the folks that are kind of like us. How do you think that folks can overcome that, and are there any policies that we ought to think about trying to push for in that regard?
Well, I'm a big fan of local.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have talked about Code for America and said, you should work at the state and federal level. For us, for now, it's not just an expedient choice. It's easier to work at the local level, but it's become, again, part of our values. And I think that's because there has been this retreat. In fact, there was an article in the New York Times last year that was titled "The Year We Gave Up on Government." Did anyone read that? It was this woman, Chrystia Freeland, I think. And she was talking about, in our history, we've always had this notion of exit or voice. I can't remember the name of the political philosopher that came up with it in Europe, but it came to America, and it had a particular meaning here in America because you always had the frontier. So if you don't like something about society, your choices are complain about it or get out. And here, with this amazing frontier, there was a long history of people just saying, I don't like how this is going, I'm moving west. Right. And she didn't say that, but what I kind of concluded from that was that's right. And then we ran out of land and we just retreated to cyberspace. I mean, in high school, the kids in my high school who actually had access to the internet, They were retreating because it's a horrible place to be, right? But if you find your tribe on the internet, you don't care where you are. You've got your friends somewhere. And that has been sort of this trend. And the suburbanization of America has become part of that, where we're not as connected. And what I see right now is a retreat, a return from that, but with a twist. So people now seem to, and certainly the fellows seem to care actually not just about their Facebook friends, but about knowing who lives on their block, and knowing the person who runs the store on the corner, and knowing the people near them. And they see the physical world around them deteriorating. They see, the lack of maintenance in our public infrastructure, and they say, the physical world and my current actual local geography actually matters. But what's interesting is that they're able then to bring some of the technology and the convenience that they have, that they see in the digital world now to that local area. The policy thing that I would conclude from that, and I'm really not a policy, I'm even less of a policy person than I am a programmer, but is that we need to put more money into the local level. We need to put more attention there. I think mayors at this point have more of an impact on us in many ways than the president. I mean, right. I'm a fan of the president. It's not about that, but it's who's dealing with Occupy Wall Street? Mayors. Right. Who's dealing with climate change? Mayors. There's when the entire country is now going to be is now focused on the presidential campaign, and I think at the expense of what really matters in politics, and your daily life. What matters is your mayor and your city council people and how they're actually getting your city through an enormous municipal
and of course,
crisis.
the turnout numbers in mayoral elections mostly, most places are really, really low.
Yeah, but and a lot of it's the media. It's just, the mayoral elections are not, they're not as exciting as Obama, Romney, and Kim Kardashian, But,
fair enough. Is she joining somebody's ticket now? News to me. News flash.
They're sometimes covered in the same way, I guess is my point.
Well, some of us, some folks are looking for a third party, so there you go, as it were. So I'm sure people have some other questions, probably better than mine. So let's take some questions from out here. Gentleman right in the front row. Can you get him a mic? Well, maybe this one will work.
I can.
Is it working? Yes. So, Darius Dunlap, Square Peg Foundation, among other things. You structured Code for America in a certain way with relatively small teams, relatively long commitment with them going in for a year and doing this full time. Could you talk to us about why you decided to do it that way and how you kind of see that all developing in the future and what direction you see that going?
Sure. Obviously, small teams, because they can do, in a weird way, they can do more. In fact, we had some teams of 7 last year due to a kind of a glitch in our program, and they did great stuff, but they ended up having to split into smaller teams. We have them follow Eric Ries's lean startup methodology, and it's just easier to do that. I think with a small group of people, they'll end up doing a couple of different projects throughout the year. It's easier for the city governments to understand who they are. They get to really know them. Actually, one of our fellows last year had a beard down to here. And in Boston, people would come up to him, and he was sort of branded as the guy. People would come up into the hallway and go, "I hear you're one of those Code for America fellows. Can you come help me with my server problem or my email problem or something?" And it's like it's a small enough group that everyone kind of knows who they are, and they get a good reputation. One thing we definitely, some of the design of the program was accidental, and now we like it and we're keeping it. And one of those things is we just do 1 year and then we're out. There's one exception to that, but the idea is that we're not going in. With Teach for America, intentionally, you want to have people there year after year. If we're going to be an effective innovation culture virus, we need to go in there for a year, change some perceptions, and then get out, because they need to institutionalize it. And if we're still there year after year, we become the innovation crutch. And we'll go back a year late, a couple years later. We're actually, Boston's asking us to come back maybe in the Boston Health Commission. So it'll be a different department. That's fine with us, but we don't want to sort of get stuck in one city because we want to make sure that this isn't about us, right? It's not about the fellows in the end. It's about the city owning that innovation agenda and making it real for themselves. Does that help? Okay.
But what about shorter-term things like hackathons and things like that?
Yeah, we do a ton of hackathons. I mean, all the time. Yeah, we're trying. I mean, just said one thing about hackathons. Hackathons are fantastic, and they have what this guy wrote an article last year called the CFA effect, which is basically the hackathon effect, right? When you get a bunch of people together, they build a bunch of apps in 2 days, and at the end, you've got people from city government going around, wow, you guys all built that in 2 days or 1 day? It sets the bar differently, and it has a really important cultural impact. But there have been a lot of hackathons, and there's a lot of technology that's been developed, civic technology, which is fantastic but immature. And so what we're trying to do, we have this new program called the Code for America Brigade, which says, if you want to do civic technology, can we please build on each other's work? So we get people locally in small towns, big cities, whatever, all around the country now to get together, and instead of starting a hackathon, we ask them to start from the work that other hackathons have done and mature those apps, standing up existing apps rather than starting from scratch every time.
Great. Question here in the middle.
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Pratap Penamali. I'm a product manager at Google. Question I had was, you talked about the gap between, as soon as the coders get in there in government, it's just kind of a shock to the system.
Yeah.
Were there other takeaways in terms of other needs other than coders, even if it's not your organization that's going to fulfill them, that kind of came out with the coders, kind of the classes coming out of the program saying, oh my God, there's this other need and other types of skills that would be great to be inserted into government in a similar way?
That's a good question. Yeah, actually, we do an enormous amount with design. I think Carla Macedo, one of our fellows last year, redesigned most of Boston's logos for all of their departments. Most of them are actually in use or being rolled out now. She rebranded basically the whole city. It's pretty fantastic. And that's just, that's graphic design work where, Carla's amazing. Carla comes from an immigrant family. When she talks about why she wanted to do Code for America, it was because she felt like when you don't speak the language, it's really hard to navigate our public institutions. And she just wanted to make it easier. She wanted to make it more graphically appealing and simple. She actually worked with a bunch of people. There's a really cool organization called the Noun Project. Carla partnered with them last year to create something like 200 icons, public domain icons in the civic sector, so that you could brand stuff and you could use icons in your mobile apps and things that meant things about local government, and it just makes it so much easier to navigate when those things are, or so much easier to build apps also when those things are there. So graphic design, I could spend all day talking about user experience design in government. Need I say more than that? Huge need. And in fact, about a third of our fellows this year are user experience designers in one way or another. In fact, one of them is from Google. Social media helps, certainly, and then sort of process helps. But it's, more than specific skill sets, I think the thing that we really provide is simply an attitude of, can we just try something? Can we just do something really quickly? It might not be perfect, but it's not going to take 2 years, and if it doesn't work, we'll toss it out and we'll try something else. But it's an agile maker mentality that we bring more than any particular skill set.
That occurs to me to ask you then. At Google, a big thing in our history, it's always been launch, and in lots of software companies, launch fast and iterate, launch fast and iterate. How is that received? That sort of approach? Do you have people in government saying, "Well, isn't it perfect? We're not going to actually unveil this until it's perfect, right?" I mean, how do those conversations go?
Yeah, with great trepidation.
Yes.
So actually one of the really concrete things that we carried over from last year to this year is just some template language about what a beta is. just you generally don't go do a live beta in government. But if you're going to do Agile, if you're going to do Lean, if you're going to put out a minimum viable product and see where it goes, you have to do a lot of caveating. Sure. And in fact, the UK did a great job of this. Anyone seen UK.gov? It's fantastic. They sort of re-engineered all of their federal websites around sort of a search box. And they put it up with this. You couldn't actually click through to the page until you read a big disclaimer that said this is a beta. And by the way, this is what a beta is. You can't just say beta.
Right.
It might not work. It might not be perfect. So one of the things we learned to do is just put stuff up without the city name on it, right? Because if it's not officially a project, that didn't work some places though. We definitely got hit the first round with, okay, we're going to push this live. Oh, sure, that's fine. We're just going to run it through legal and we'll get back to you. I'm sorry. I know you're legal. And it was like, oh, when are you going to get back to me? Oh, we don't know. I mean, in months. And so we had to figure out ways around that. But yeah.
Oops.
We did some things that we just sort of had to do and covered it later.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, good. More questions?
I'm Chad Dorsey Chad Dorsey from the Concord Consortium. We're in Concord, Massachusetts. We were lucky enough to have a brown bag from Max Ogden and his beard not too long ago. I think everybody on Twitter knows Max by his beard, too.
That's right.
Do you have any lessons that you've learned about what aspects of a bureaucracy make for good CFA or good innovation, and what aspects? I mean, can you by now start to look at a city or go into a city hall and say, yeah, not going to work here, or this one's really going to work? I mean, we've been fortunate in Boston to see that really work, and I'm sure it's not just because of CFA. Boston's done some things on its part to be open to that.
Oh, Boston was the perfect first city for us because of Nigel Jacob and Chris Osgood there. They run an office called New Urban Mechanics. No other city has this, but soon, I think 5 or 6 will. Part of what we try to do is just spread good ideas. New Urban Mechanics is a very good idea. It comes from Mayor Menino there saying, branding himself in one of his, how many terms has he done? I don't even know, but initially he was known as the urban mechanic. I fix things. And then as he adopted Pension for Digital Technology, he became the new urban mechanic and hired 2 amazing guys to run this office that they describe essentially as their risk aggregator, right? The risk aversion is natural in government, but it holds us back. And if you can be the office that says, we would like to partner with you, Department of Public Works or Education Department, on this innovative project, and our role in it will be to take all the blame if it goes wrong. Right. It's an incredibly effective technique. And actually, we do that too. That's one of the ways we know we're in a city is if we say, you know what, we're happy to take the blame if this doesn't work. And of course, with 28-year-olds running around with long beards, people expect you to do something wrong. The answer to your question, though, is I think what we've seen is you have to have a couple people in government who are super activated, and then you want some bench strength beyond that 1 or 2 people who are supportive of it. You can't have a lone innovator or will fail. I mean, eventually I think maybe we'll get strong enough that we can work in a city where there's just sort of one champion. But we can't do it without that one champion. It's generally been 2. And those people are easy to identify. They're the ones that raise their hands and go, oh my God, I must have Code for America here because they will enable the agenda I've been trying to push forward for years. And one of the ways that we know we've succeeded is if people like that are promoted or honored or more respected when we leave. There was a guy in Philadelphia who came up to our fellows again in the hallway and said, shh, don't tell anybody, but I have a bunch of data on my server downstairs that you guys can have. And he was clearly like the open data guy who'd been marginalized for years. Right. And they were like, cool. And they followed him down and they got the data and they brought it to the hackathon and they wrote some apps on it. That guy got promoted at the end of the year because now that's part of the culture.
Exactly. Great. Ben, go ahead.
It's Vince Cerf. This is a fabulous conversation. Thank you for organizing it. I want to take this in a slightly different direction. I have spent the last year looking at public safety and public safety communications, and it's a sad picture. I wonder whether you've had occasion to come up against the problems of public safety communications for first responders, and if so, did any ideas come to mind?
I have one story about the police department in a city I won't name that I'll share. That's not a happy story, but I think I've got some more positive stuff. So our fellows in one city last year went and visited the police department. We have them in that month that they're there actually visit a lot of different departments, not just the ones where they're in the problem area that we're going to be working, because we kind of want them to get how a city works. And on the website of this city, there is a tip line. So you can write in, there is drug dealing going on at the corner of 4th and Main or something like that. So they ask what happens to that information. And what happens is it gets sent to someone's email. Somebody prints that email out, sorts them daily by precinct, puts them in an interoffice envelope, and they are driven at the end of the week to the precincts. And so those tips arrive by car. And so this is exactly the kind of low-hanging fruit that the fellows try to handle in their spare time. This is not a $2.5 billion problem, as many government technology problems apparently seem to be. This is like a 2 guys in an afternoon problem, right? We can just even email it there directly to the precinct. So the sad ending of that story is that the police department declined to have us fix that for reasons that we could never understand. But there are certainly sometimes, there are just cases where the way it works is the way it's going to work, and we pushed on it for a while, and then we decided it's probably not worth it to keep pushing here because we're going to make a pretty bad enemy, and we went on to fix some other problems. The good news is, though, that in 2 of our cities this year, in Philadelphia and in Macon, Georgia, they're working very closely with the police department with some really concrete problems and opportunities. Like the police department actually knows quite a bit about how to prevent crime. They just can't get the citizens to sort of understand it and get on board with it. Things like car break-ins. The sooner you can tell someone on a block that their neighbor's car has been broken into, the better chance you have of avoiding more. And so they're becoming more open to things like, can the people on the block actually text each other instead of sending it to you guys, and somebody the next morning maybe gets up and sends something out to people on the block? Can we actually go peer-to-peer, citizen to citizen on this? There's a much greater openness to it that we're seeing this year. So hopefully I'll have some happier stories for you by the end of the year.
Great. Any other questions? I think we have time for one more, if we've got one. No? Going once, twice? One more.
Thanks. Do you know, on that same topic, do you know of any neighborhood watch apps that are available now that people could use?
Neighborhood watch apps. I bet our fellows do. I don't know of any off the top of my head. There's a lot of good neighbor, to the extent that neighbors knowing each other and having a communication channel is the most important thing. There are a number of those out there right now. I would say maybe 20. None of them is having huge success right now, I think. But even look at something like Neighbor Goods, which is just designed actually not for public safety, but to allow neighbors to borrow tools from each other, for instance. Things like that are shown to just strengthen the connections in a neighborhood, and then you tend to get lower crime just because people have a channel to communicate with each other. But again, our fellows are kind of researching this right now, so they probably have a more specific answer for you.
And there's no better replacement, or there's nothing out there yet that will replace just walking across the street and talking to your neighbor and saying, this is what's going on.
Yeah, there's something that most cities have, or many cities have now, called National Night Out. It's in the summer. The police department encourages everybody to hold a block party. If you register your block party, the police will actually come visit. I hold one every year, and the police bring coloring books and crayons for the children, which is like
Nice.
police-themed coloring books. Yay! They're really weird. But this technology of National Night Out is probably the most effective thing I've seen. And one of the things we're doing in one of the cities is just making the process. For that one night a year, it's really easy to do a block party. Every other night, you have to go get a form and go get 40 signatures, physical signatures. So we're going to try to put the block party application online so people can have more of these.
Great. Well, Jennifer, thank you for all these great insights.
Thank
It's a
you.
wonderful
It's been
conversation.
fun.
Thank you for coming.